It began like any ordinary school morning. The sound of lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on tile floors, and laughter echoing down the halls. But in the middle of that noise was one sound that cut deeper than the rest: the cruel laughter of a bully. His jokes weren't funny, but they drew a crowd anyway. They always did. And the quiet kid he targeted, Eli, stood there with his head down, holding his books close, trying not to show the tremor in his hands. He had learned that silence was safer than fighting back. That day, the bully went too far. He didn't just mock Eli's clothes or his quiet nature. He humiliated him in front of everyone. The other students laughed, some nervously, others just to fit in. No one defended him. Eli's eyes burned with unshed tears, but he didn't speak. He simply walked away, his steps heavy with the weight of another day survived. What no one knew was that the boy they called weak was fighting battles far beyond the school walls, and that the lesson waiting for his tormentor would come from the most unexpected place. Later that afternoon, as the bully boasted about his victory, he didn't notice the group of motorcycles pulling up outside the school gates. Their engines growled like thunder rolling across the pavement. Students turned toward the sound, curiosity and fear mixing in their expressions. Leather jackets, steel boots, and chrome. These weren't teachers or parents. They were bikers. And among them was a man who had once been like Eli, quiet, bruised, and underestimated. The bikers parked in perfect formation, their presence commanding instant silence. The air shifted. Even the bully, once so loud, felt his laughter die in his throat. The leader stepped forward, his eyes sharp, his voice steady. "We heard there's someone around here who thinks strength comes from hurting others." His words echoed across the courtyard, and every heart skipped a beat. No one moved. No one dared to speak. That day, the bully, and everyone who had watched without standing up, was about to learn what respect truly meant. Because sometimes, it takes the roar of engines and the weight of honor to remind the world that real strength isn't found in cruelty or fear. It's found in courage, compassion, and standing up for those who can't. And before that school day was over, those bikers would leave behind a lesson no one would ever forget. The leader of the biker group, known to most as Hawk, stood silently for a moment, letting the tension in the courtyard thicken. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone demanded attention. The students whispered among themselves, wondering who had called them and why they were there. The bully, still trying to play the tough guy, smirked nervously. "What? Are you here to scare kids?" he said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Hawk turned his gaze on him, the kind of look that makes a person forget how to breathe. "Scare you," he said quietly. "No. We're here to teach you something your parents and teachers should have taught you long ago. What respect really means." His voice carried across the courtyard like a steady heartbeat. Behind him, the other bikers stood in silence, their leather jackets gleaming under the afternoon sun, each patch representing years of loyalty, loss, and brotherhood. The bully tried to laugh again, but it came out hollow. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. Eli stood at the back, watching, his heart pounding. He had no idea what was happening, but for the first time, the focus wasn't on him. It was on the one who had made his life miserable. Hawk took a slow step closer to the bully, his boots echoing against the concrete. "Tell me something," he said. "Do you think you're strong because people are afraid of you?" The bully's smirk faded. I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. Hawk tilted his head slightly. "I think you do. You hurt people because it makes you feel powerful. But I've seen real power, kid. I've seen men take bullets for each other. I've seen people who have nothing give everything to protect someone else. That's strength. Not this." His words hit harder than any punch could. The courtyard was completely silent. Eli stood frozen, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: justice. For years, he had carried pain in silence, but now someone was speaking the words he had never dared to say out loud. The bully's bravado was gone, replaced by a flicker of shame. Hawk could see it, and he didn't push further. He simply placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Everyone gets one chance to change the story they're writing. Don't waste yours." Then, turning to the crowd, he added, "And the rest of you, remember that silence can wound as much as cruelty." The biker stayed for a while after that, speaking not just to the bully but to the entire group of students. Hawk told them that he and his brothers weren't there to intimidate anyone. They were there because someone had reached out. A teacher, tired of seeing good kids crushed by cruelty, had called them. "We're not heroes," Hawk said. "We just remember what it felt like to be powerless, and we swore we'd never let that happen again where we could stop it." Eli listened from the back, his eyes wide. No one had ever stood up for him before. Not like this. He watched as Hawk spoke with a calm authority that silenced even the loudest whispers. The bully's friends stood awkwardly nearby, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. They weren't laughing anymore. They were thinking, really thinking, about the kind of people they wanted to be. Then Hawk looked straight at Eli. "You," he said. Eli froze. "Yeah, you. What's your name?" "Eli," he stammered. Hawk nodded. "Eli, you're stronger than you think. Not because you fight back, but because you haven't let this place break you." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The world will always have bullies. The question is, will you let them define you, or will you rise above them? Eli felt something inside him shift, a warmth, a strength that had long been buried beneath fear. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. Hawk smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said he understood. "Good," Hawk said softly, "because someday, someone else will need you to be strong for them. And when that day comes, you'll know exactly what to do." As the engines roared to life once more, the students stood in awe. The sound echoed through the school grounds like thunder, but it wasn't frightening. It was powerful, symbolic, unforgettable. For the first time in a long time, Eli didn't feel small. And even the bully, standing there in silence, seemed to understand that what had just happened wasn't a punishment. It was a wake-up call. When the rumble of the engines finally faded into the distance, the schoolyard was left in stunned silence. For the first time, no one moved. The students, who had always watched bullying like a show they couldn't stop, now stood frozen in thought. Something had shifted. The laughter that used to follow cruelty had been replaced with quiet reflection. Even the teachers, who had watched from the windows, felt a strange mix of shame and gratitude. Someone from the outside had done what they hadn't, restored balance through respect. The bully, whose name was Marcus, stood alone, his hands clenched in uncertainty. He wasn't angry, not this time. He was lost. Everything that had once made him feel powerful now felt hollow. He could still hear Hawk's voice in his head. Everyone gets one chance to change the story they're writing. For the first time, Marcus realized that his story wasn't something to be proud of. It was built on fear, not strength. Later that day, Marcus found Eli sitting alone under the bleachers, the same place he always hid during lunch. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy, filled with everything Marcus wanted to say, but didn't know how. Finally, he muttered, "Hey." Eli glanced up cautiously, expecting another insult. But Marcus's voice was different, lower, hesitant. I'm sorry." Eli blinked, unsure if he had heard right. "Sorry," he repeated quietly. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, for everything. I thought being tough meant making other people feel small. But that guy, Hawk, he made me feel like nothing. Not because he yelled, but because he didn't have to." He looked down, ashamed. "I don't want to be that person anymore." For a long time, Eli didn't respond. Then, with quiet sincerity, he said, "You don't have to be." It was simple, but it was real. The two sat there in silence for a while, not as enemies, but as two boys who had both been broken in different ways. And for the first time, the distance between them didn't feel impossible to cross. In the days that followed, the school felt different. Word spread quickly about the visit from the bikers. Some students laughed about it, calling it dramatic. Others couldn't stop talking about how powerful it had been. But the ones who had been there, the ones who had seen it, knew it was more than just a spectacle. It had been a reckoning. The atmosphere in the halls began to change. People started noticing each other more. The jokes that used to sting were no longer as loud. Eli noticed it most of all. For years, he had walked those halls like a ghost, unseen and unheard. But now people greeted him. Some apologized. Some just nodded, a silent sign of respect. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. And in his chest, something fragile and long forgotten began to grow. Confidence. He wasn't invisible anymore. One morning, Marcus approached him at his locker, holding something awkwardly in his hands. A small patch, black and red, with the image of wings embroidered into it. "They gave me this," Marcus said. "One of the bikers found me after school that day. Said Hawk wanted you to have it." Eli took the patch carefully, his fingers trembling as he read the small words stitched underneath. "Respect is earned." He said it's from their club. Marcus continued, scratching the back of his neck. "Said you reminded them of who they used to be." Eli looked down at the patch, then back up at Marcus. "You were right," Eli said softly. "Everyone gets one chance to change their story." Marcus smiled faintly. "Yeah, and I think we both just started ours." That night, Eli pinned the patch on his backpack. It wasn't just fabric. It was proof that even in a world filled with cruelty, good still had a way of roaring back. The engines had left, but the lesson remained, echoing in every quiet moment of courage that followed. The following weeks brought subtle but powerful changes. The school that once turned its back on injustice began to find its voice. Teachers started addressing cruelty instead of ignoring it. Students who had stayed silent began stepping in when someone was mocked or cornered. Eli noticed it all from the sidelines, quietly amazed by how a single moment, a rumble of engines, a few words from strangers, had reshaped an entire community. Respect had taken root where fear once ruled. Marcus became part of that change too. He wasn't perfect. No one expected him to be, but his efforts were genuine. He joined Eli at lunch, not because he felt guilty, but because he wanted to understand what it meant to be kind. Sometimes they talked about music, sometimes about life, and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Their classmates were stunned to see them together, but over time, it became normal. The bully and the quiet kid had found a kind of friendship no one saw coming. One afternoon, as the two of them walked home, Marcus pointed to the horizon where the faint sound of engines echoed in the distance. "You ever wonder if they'll come back?" he asked. Eli smiled softly. "Maybe they already have," he said, "just not in the way we think." Marcus frowned, puzzled, until Eli continued. "I think they left something behind, not just the noise, but the courage to do what's right." Marcus nodded, his face thoughtful. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of their footsteps filled the quiet street, steady and calm. The world felt a little different now, warmer, safer. And even though they didn't know it yet, that sound of engines would return, but not because of punishment or fear. It would return for something greater. Far away, on the open road, Hawk rode with his crew under a fading sunset. The wind whipped through his hair as he glanced at a small photo taped to his handlebars, a photo of that school, of Eli and Marcus standing side by side. A smile tugged at his lips. "Told you, kid," he murmured to himself. "Everyone gets one chance." A few months later, the school hosted an assembly on anti-bullying. The principal wanted to do something meaningful, something that would reach the students' hearts, not just their ears. When she asked who should speak, the choice was unanimous: Eli and Marcus. The two boys who had lived both sides of the story. Nervous but determined, they stood on stage before hundreds of eyes that once ignored them. Marcus went first. His voice trembled slightly, but his words were steady. "I thought being feared made me strong," he began. "But fear doesn't make you strong. It makes you hollow. Real strength is standing up for someone, not against them." The crowd was silent, every student listening with wide eyes. Then Eli stepped forward, clutching his backpack with the patch still pinned to it. "Sometimes," he said softly, "you don't need to fight to be brave. Sometimes just refusing to hate is enough." The room erupted in applause. Not the kind of polite applause people give out of obligation, but the kind that rises from genuine emotion. Teachers wiped tears from their eyes. Even the principal looked moved, her expression full of pride. For the first time, Eli and Marcus weren't just students. They were symbols of what transformation looked like when someone dared to change. After the assembly, as they walked outside, the distant roar of motorcycles rolled across the air again. They both froze, turning toward the sound. Down the street, a familiar line of bikes approached, their headlights gleaming under the afternoon sun. The students poured out to watch, whispering in awe as the Hells Angels pulled up to the school gates once more. Hawk dismounted first, walking toward the boys with that same calm authority. "Looks like you didn't waste your chance," he said. Eli grinned. "You were right. It wasn't just a lesson. It was a beginning." Hawk clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder and nodded. Then keep riding that road, both of you. Respect is a journey. It never ends. The sound of the engines faded as the bikers parked along the edge of the schoolyard. This time, there was no tension, no fear, only admiration. Students gathered near the windows and doors, their eyes wide with anticipation. Hawk looked around, his face proud but composed. Looks different now, he said, glancing toward Eli and Marcus. Last time we came here, I could feel anger in the air. Now, I feel respect. Marcus smiled shyly. We've been trying, he said. Hawk nodded. That's all it takes. Trying. He turned toward the crowd of students, slowly stepping outside. You see these two, he said, his voice carrying through the courtyard. They remind me of the roads we ride. Some are rough, some are smooth. But if you keep going long enough, they'll always lead somewhere better. The students listened, hanging on every word. He continued, his tone deep and sincere. It's easy to laugh at someone. It's easy to be cruel. But it takes real courage to look someone in the eye and say, I was wrong. That's what strength is. He looked back at Marcus, who lowered his gaze in quiet humility. And when someone forgives you, Hawk added, that's even stronger. The moment was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was human. Every person there could feel it. Then one of the bikers stepped forward, a tall man with a scar across his jaw. You kids think we ride just for the noise or the freedom, he said. But what we're really chasing is redemption. Every ride reminds us to be better than we were yesterday. He looked toward Eli. You kid, you've got that kind of heart. Don't ever lose it. Eli felt his throat tighten. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Hawk smiled faintly, sensing the emotion in the air. Let's leave them something to remember, he said. The bikers lined up their motorcycles in perfect formation once more. As they started their engines, the sound rolled through the air like a living heartbeat. Powerful, steady, full of life. But this time, the roar wasn't about intimidation. It was about honor. Every student there knew they were witnessing something unforgettable. After the bikers left, life at the school changed in ways no one could have predicted. The courtyard, once the stage for cruelty, became a place where people gathered to talk, laugh, and look out for one another. Teachers said the atmosphere felt lighter, as if a cloud had finally lifted. The story of the bikers who taught the school respect spread far beyond their small town. It became a lesson shared in classrooms, news articles, even community events. Eli and Marcus were at the center of it all. They didn't seek fame or recognition. They just kept living the lesson they had learned. They started a small student group called the Brotherhood, where kids could share their struggles and support one another. No one was left out. No one was ignored. It wasn't about popularity. It was about unity. And every time someone wore the small patch they created, a symbol of wings and open hands, it reminded them of what they stood for. One evening, months later, Eli was leaving school when he saw an envelope taped to his locker. Inside was a photo of the bikers from that first day, standing in front of their motorcycles. On the back, in rough handwriting, were the words, "Keep the road clean, kid. We're proud of you. Hawk." Eli smiled and slipped the photo into his backpack. The roar of engines might have faded, but the echo of their lesson would never leave him. Marcus joined him outside, noticing the smile on Eli's face. They still watching over us? He asked. Eli nodded. Yeah, always. They walked together down the same street where Hawk and his crew had once ridden away, the setting sun casting a golden glow across the pavement. For the first time, the world didn't feel so big or so cruel. It felt connected, alive, full of promise. And somewhere far away, on a quiet stretch of open highway, the Hells Angels rode beneath a sky streaked with fire and light. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Because they knew, without a doubt, that their message had found a home. The boy who had once been mocked now carried their spirit, their honor, their road. And that was all the proof they'd ever need that respect, once planted, never dies. Time moved on, but the echoes of that day never left the town. Every once in a while, someone would hear the distant hum of engines on the highway and smile, remembering the lesson that had rewritten their lives. The school, once a place of quiet cruelty, had become a space of understanding. It wasn't perfect. No place ever is, but something lasting had taken root. The students had learned that respect wasn't just a word on posters or assemblies. It was a way of living. Eli continued to grow, carrying the strength the bikers had seen in him. He excelled in his studies, but more than that, he became the kind of person who noticed others, the ones who sat alone, who hid behind silence, who needed someone to see them. Every time he helped someone stand taller, he remembered Hawk's words. Everyone gets one chance to change the story they're writing. For Eli, that chance had become a calling. Marcus walked that same path, though his journey wasn't easy. People didn't forget easily, and sometimes old mistakes followed him like shadows. But he never stopped trying. Each apology he gave, each act of kindness he offered, chipped away at the person he used to be. And slowly, the same people who once feared him began to trust him. He learned that redemption wasn't a single moment. It was a lifetime of choices. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Eli and Marcus met outside the diner where Hawk had once stopped for coffee. They talked about everything, the past, the future, the strange twist of fate that had brought the bikers into their lives. Eli looked out at the empty road. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" he asked. Marcus smiled faintly. "I think they already did," he said. "Every time we make the right choice, they're right here." The road before them stretched endlessly into the horizon, glowing under the last light of day. And though neither of them could hear it, far beyond the hills, the faint rumble of motorcycles rolled through the wind, steady, eternal, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. Years later, that little school became known across the region not for its academics, but for its legacy, a culture of respect born from a single moment of courage. Eli, now a young man, returned as a teacher. He carried the same patch Hawk had once given him, now framed above his desk. Respect is earned. It wasn't just a motto, it was a promise he lived by. On his first day back, he met a quiet student standing alone by the lockers, eyes lowered, books clutched to his chest. The sight was familiar. Eli walked over and said softly, "Hey, what's your name?" The boy mumbled something under his breath, barely audible. Eli smiled and handed him the patch he had once carried. "Someone gave me this when I needed it most. I think it's yours now." The boy looked up, confused, but Eli just nodded. "You'll understand someday." That evening, as Eli locked up his classroom, he stood for a moment in the empty hallway. The quiet hum of the lights, the faint sound of the wind outside, it all reminded him of that day, so many years ago. He whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Hawk." And somewhere, somehow, he liked to believe the man heard him. Out on the open highway, under a sky dusted with stars, the Hell's Angels rode on. Time had changed their faces, but not their mission. They weren't just riders, they were reminders. Proof that sometimes the hardest hearts can carry the deepest lessons, and that real power lies not in fear, but in how we treat one another. And in that eternal rhythm of engines and wind, a quiet truth echoed, one that Eli, Marcus, and everyone who had witnessed that day would never forget. Respect isn't taught by force. It's earned by example, and those who live it become the kind of legends that never fade. What began as a moment of cruelty in a schoolyard became a story that redefined strength for an entire generation. The roar of engines and the calm authority of the bikers had done more than silence a bully. They had lit a spark that grew into a movement of respect, redemption, and change. Years later, that lesson still echoed through the halls, in a laughter that no longer carried cruelty, in the kindness that now came naturally, and in the quiet courage of those who chose empathy over pride. Eli's journey proved that strength doesn't come from power, it comes from heart. His silence had once been mistaken for weakness, but it became his greatest teacher. He learned that true courage is not about fighting back with fists, but about standing firm in decency when the world expects bitterness. And Marcus, the boy who once mocked him, showed that even those who fall the hardest can rise stronger when they decide to change. Together, they turned pain into purpose, and that became their legacy. The bikers, meanwhile, continued to ride the open roads, never looking for praise or glory. They had seen too much of the world's darkness to believe that one act could fix it all, but they also knew that one act could start something. For them, the road was more than asphalt. It was a reminder that every mile, every choice, every chance to do what's right was a step toward redemption. They didn't save Eli and Marcus. They simply reminded them, and everyone watching, what humanity still looks like when lived with honor. And so the sound of those engines became something timeless, a symbol that real strength is quiet, that true respect is earned, and that kindness, once chosen, never fades. It becomes a legacy, passed from one generation to the next, whispered in hallways, carried in the wind, and remembered in every act of courage that begins with compassion. If this story moved you, let it remind you of your own power to change the world around you. One choice, one act of kindness at a time. Share your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a like if you believe respect still matters. And subscribe to keep these stories alive. Because the roads may change, the faces may fade, but the message remains. Honor is not taught, it's lived.